live on Sky News Australia. The Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. I'm Liz Storer, standing in for Rita, and coming up tonight, big consumer brands are boycotting Australia Day, but Kmart has pledged to go one further. Why hasn't Labor designated the October 7 massacres an international act of terrorism? Is their allegiance to Gaza really that blind to Hamas's atrocities? A pint of beer could soon cost you $15 at your local pub as the government looks to new ways of robbing you blind and calling it tax. But first, let's check in with our global overlords at the World Economic Forum, shall we? They met this week for their usual powwow in Davos, the annual gathering of billionaires telling millionaires how to tell us, the little people, how to live our lives. Unfortunately, what these globalists, which are just a huge fusion of big government, big tech, big money, what they say actually is relevant to us, whether we like it or not. As our supposedly sovereign governments all over the world, yes, ours included, take their cue from what's best described now as a quasi-one world government. Let's start with their opening ceremony, shall we? What in the fresh hell did we just watch? Let's take a moment to appreciate that just a couple of years ago, these same people wouldn't let us leave our houses without wearing a mask, without social distancing 6 feet from each other. Now they're getting a woman to cough in their faces while we are still being told COVID is still on the loose, don't get sloppy, get your next jab. After that, they got straight down to business, and you'll never guess what their number one priority is this year.
The top concern for the next 2 years is not conflict or climate. It is disinformation and misinformation, followed closely by polarization within our societies. These risks are serious because they limit our ability to tackle the big global challenges we are facing.
These risks are serious because they limit our ability to control the narrative, to manipulate the masses unopposed. Free speech must be eradicated. That was the president of the European Commission. Well, lady, the Albanese government is way ahead of you. They introduced their Combating Misinformation, Disinformation bill last year. And of course, it's no coincidence the two are in tandem. The will of the West, the will of the Albanese government. Now, the concept of the New World Order being foisted upon us by this all-powerful fusion of big government, big tech, big money has been pilloried as a nonsense conspiracy theory over the years, which is really convenient if you're the WEF because that's what they'd love you to believe. But get a load of this. They openly discuss it and how they're going to usher it in.
That order seems to not be the order anymore. We are on the way to a new order, so we are between orders. Do you agree with that, or are there ways of what are we able to keep on the positive side from the old order to bring into a new world order, and how can we avoid that new world order becomes like a jungle growing back and we rather have an order based on international law?
Seriously, who are these people? Whoever they are, they're on the job saving the planet, so you've got to do whatever they say, which includes allowing them to track what you eat, your travels, who you speak to, and everything else.
We're developing, through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
Oh, we'll stay tuned, all right. Can't wait. Again, these guys have incredible synchronicity with our government. Albanese introduced his digital ID bill just last year, which will enable this new technology beautifully. I say new because I reckon China would laugh at that. But don't worry, it's for our own good. They're only doing it to save us from the climate emergency. But of course, because this is an election year and President Trump is on the ballot, these guys are actually sweating bullets. Trump has never hidden his utter disdain for the WEF, the UN and other international organisations of the same ilk. Here he was at the 2020 Davos powwow.
We must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse. They are the heirs of yesterday's foolish fortune tellers. They predicted an overpopulation crisis in the 1960s, mass starvation in the 70s, and an end of oil in the 1990s. These alarmists always demand the same thing: absolute power to dominate, transform, and control every aspect of our lives. We will never let radical socialists destroy our economy, wreck our country, or eradicate our liberty.
There he was, just casually talking about them to them. Classic Trump. Which is why chief of the extreme left BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, largest money manager, and therefore supreme leader of the empire, used his talking time at Davos to say that a Trump victory this year would pose a fundamental challenge to their plans for world domination. He's not wrong. Trump's mantra of America first, from trade to diplomacy, NATO funding, climate policy, is a real thorn in their side. But this year's gathering wasn't without its heroes. Those who took the stage only to reveal they'd only climbed into the belly of the WEF beast to implode in their faces. Here's Heritage President Kevin Roberts, who wasn't having a bar of their Trump bashing.
It's laughable that you would, or anyone would, describe Davos as protecting liberal democracy. It's equally,
standing up for it.
It's equally laughable to use the word dictatorship at Davos and aim that at President Trump. In fact, I think that's absurd. President Trump, if he's the next president, for that matter, I think whoever the next conservative president, is going to take on the power of the elites. Political elites tell the average people on 3 or 4 or 5 issues that the reality is X, when in fact reality is Y.
He just went nuclear. I wish I could show you his whole speech. It's glorious. He systematically rips them to shreds, and he was not alone. Argentina's new president also took the stage with a blistering 23-minute lecture which mirrored Trump's 2018 Davos strategy, talking about them to them.
Do not be intimidated either by the political class or by parasites who live off the state. Do not surrender to a political class that only wants to stay in power and retain its privileges. Do not surrender to the advance of the state. The state is not the solution. The state is the problem itself. You are the true protagonists of this story. And rest assured that as from today, Argentina is your staunch, unconditional ally. Thank you very much, and long live freedom. Damn it.
Freedom, damn it! The whole 23 minutes is well worth a watch, if only to encourage yourself. We've now got a handful of these leaders on the world stage, and their number is growing as people like you and me wisen up to the new world order and elect these guys with the understanding that we, you and me, we are the resistance now. Joining me now to go over the day's top stories is Nick Cater of the Menzies Research Centre. Nick, the Albanese government is refusing to call Hamas's massacre of 1,200 Israeli men, women and children an overseas terrorist act, thereby denying friends and families of the victims any financial assistance here in Australia. It's been over 100 days since the animalistic slaughter of Jewish lives at the hands of an internationally recognised terror group. Nick, how on earth can the Albanese government justify this?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, Liz. This is an international terror group committing what is undoubtedly acts of terrorism on a civilian population, acts of gross terrorism, the likes of which I can't ever recall seeing, and certainly, which, as we know, it's the worst atrocity to be committed to the Jewish people since World War II. So it's undoubtedly a terrorist attack. And why Albanese can't bring himself to do so? Well, there are two reasons. He's beholden to two groups of people. One is the wacky far left, amongst whom anti-Semitism has bizarrely become fashionable. And the other group are the Islamic constituents in Labour electorates. 11 Labour electorates have a Muslim population larger than 10%. Now, they're not all, and a lot of Muslim people would be as appalled as you and I are at this, but the Albanese government, nonetheless, I think, feels it has to pander to these people for just base political gains. It is terrible to surrender Australian policy to those forces, and worse still, to lose your moral compass in doing so.
Hear, hear. And this failure to make the declaration 100 days on means Australian Jews who lost loved ones in the attack are not eligible for any financial assistance which they would otherwise get through the Victim of Terrorism Overseas Payment Scheme. So there are real-world consequences to this inaction, Nick, and we know that it's not a case of ignorance, because Andrew Hastie, member for Canning, wrote to them days ago bringing this to their attention because one such family were in his electorate and in dire need of said financial assistance.
Well, that's right, Liz, and I'd just like to use this platform to say that although the government is failing to support Israel and failing to support the Jewish population in Australia in the proper way, many individual Australians are. I'm sporting the Israeli flag here, and I'll continue to do so on Sky News until the Albanese government shows that it can actually adopt a correct and morally correct platform on this.
You're quite right, Nick. I keep saying if they are shilling for votes in Western Sydney and other seats, as they seem to be doing through this inaction and others calling for ceasefire, etc. and so on, they're forgetting that there are millions of righteous Gentiles in this country who are taking notes and will make them pay at the election box. Well, 17 people were evacuated last night from a North Bondi unit block after yet another e-bike exploded. Nick, how many times do we have to see these lithium-ion batteries blow up in people's faces? It's incredibly unsafe. You can't put the fire out for days due to the nature of the battery. How much more needs to happen before our government takes any action?
Unfortunately, there's this kind of ideological fixation on electric vehicles that'll be very hard to break. Having decided that these are the answer to all our climate problems, just to trade in our decent diesel or petrol vehicles for electric vehicles will solve everything, and the government putting incentives there to make it happen, other governments in other parts of the world mandating that you move to electric cars. They are very imperfect technology. And the internal combustion engine and the diesel engine have been more than 120 years in development to get to where we are now. A safe, very efficient way of propelling a vehicle along. Electric vehicles have just begun. And lithium-ion batteries, well, I've got a fridge in the back of my Hilux, and I had to put in a second battery for that. It's a lithium-ion battery, but I was not going to put it under the bonnet. People tell me that's really dangerous. So, we have to be aware of these real dangers from lithium-ion batteries and act accordingly. And unfortunately, government policy is driving people towards this unsafe technology.
And meanwhile, the Albanese government is waging war on Aussies who enjoy a drink, Nick, raising the alcohol tax again next month to another blow to those struggling with the cost of living tax. Nick, it's a 2 to 3% rise, which is what's expected. It could mean a pint costs $15 and a Negroni costs $24. So much for helping with the cost of living crisis, which this government keeps saying is their number one priority.
All right, here's a very, very easy and obvious way in which the Albanese government can help struggling Australians, and that is by freezing the excise tax. It used to be, Liz, and this would be well before your time, but every time there was a federal budget, you know, the government would have to put the excise up physically and would bear the consequences for it. And the Telegraph and the other Mirror and the other tabloid papers would run headlines like "Beer Cigs Up," and the government would take the blame for that. Now it increases automatically twice a year. It's a cowardly way of raising revenue. And look, there are other things pushing up the price of alcohol, don't get me wrong, but the excise tax is the one the government can do something about. And it's not just, you know, struggling drinkers, it's the whole industry. It's the whole hospitality industry, the pubs, the clubs that are suffering because people are just going, well, you know, it used to cost me $5 a schooner, now I'm lucky to get out under $10. And that is a real problem for ordinary working Australians who work hard and then just want a quiet drink at the end of the day with their mates. So this is something the Albanese government can do, and we would like to see them do it if they're serious about reducing inflation.
Hear, hear. Nick Cater, thank you so much for your time this Friday night. Cheers. Now to the US, where in the absence of any action by the Biden administration to address the border crisis, Texas took matters into its own hands on Wednesday, with authorities arresting illegal immigrants, charging them with criminal trespassing. This is significant. These were the first arrests of illegal aliens since the state took control of their part of the border with Mexico last week, given federal officials were letting anyone and everyone through. Texas is now in a fierce standoff with the Biden administration, blocking the US Border Patrol's access to Eagle Pass. But what other options did they have as 4,000 undocumented immigrants a day flood into the US? Ami Horowitz is an American filmmaker and joins me now. Ami, is Texas the envy of every other American state right now, especially those cities who haven't a border to guard? It was back in September, the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, was pleading for federal intervention, saying that then 110,000 illegals already in New York would destroy it. He's not alone in this sentiment. We've heard similar elsewhere as states are struggling to accommodate busloads spilling into their respective cities.
Yeah, it's incredible to me to watch Eric Adams freak out about 100,000 people coming to the city when these border states, Liz, are dealing with millions of them coming through, right? We're talking about massive, massive numbers more than what we're dealing with in New York. And I live in New York, right? It is not great for us here, but imagine what it's like for the border communities living there. Look, it's incredible for me to see one of the great political malpractice we have seen in our lifetime. For this administration to essentially ignore the issue when it is one of the most important issues facing his reelection campaign, right? One of the most important issues, and he's polling at 70% disapproval. Obviously, right? It's obvious this is a complete fail at the border. But Liz, if you listen to the Democratic spinmeisters, if you listen to Kamala Harris, who's recently on The View, there is no problem at the border. There is no crisis. And if there was, she's blaming Republicans, right? They're still pushing. They just had a Democratic spinmeister on Fox News literally still go on with the kids in cages during the Trump administration. That's literally the line that they're going for. That dog ain't gonna hunt. Americans, anyone who's in the center, anyone who is even center left, understand this issue is at a crisis level, and they understand this administration is doing nothing to solve it. And they just have to look at Europe. Immigration has been a major driver of electing the people on the right in Finland and in France and in Italy and in the Netherlands. They've seen governments topple over this issue. This is just as big an issue here in the U.S., and they're doing nothing to stop it.
Absolutely. And in fact, you could say they're not only ignoring it, Army, they are facilitating it. That's what's really going on here. We know that they know what is going on. They're just refusing to do anything about it. And Americans are sick of it. The silver lining, of course, is this is a gift that keeps on giving if you're on the Trump campaign, if you're on Team Trump. This is something that he can ride all the way to the White House, isn't it?
Absolutely, no question about it. In fact, if I were Trump, right, or Trump's advisors, I would tell the president, the former president, I would say, look, if somebody asks you how's your day going, the only two words out of your mouth should be immigration and inflation. That's it. Hey, Trump, tell me what's your day like today? Immigration, inflation. But you bring up a very interesting point, right? You bring up the point about they really do know it's a crisis. They do understand that people are flooding across and they're doing nothing. And the question becomes, Liz, why? Why would they do that? And the answer is not super complicated. They have made one of the great political miscalculations, I think, maybe in history. Now, they thought that what they call, their words, not mine, the browning of America, right, which says we'll bring in all these illegals to this country. They will change the demographics of the United States. And therefore, we will have a stable supermajority, Democratic supermajority for decades because they're all going to vote Democrat. But guess what happened on the way there? We start to find out that guess what? The next generations, they are all moving toward the Republican base. And now we're seeing that this is going to end up being one of the great miscalculations in history.
Absolutely. It's invasion by design, and we all know who's responsible. 4 million, and that's just the ones we know about, just over Biden's term. It's absolutely incredible now. Let's talk about the WEF for a little bit here. They've had their annual powwow in Davos this week, and Argentina's President Javier Milei addressed the elites there in Davos to warn them that the Western world is in danger. Have a listen.
The main leaders of the Western world have abandoned the model of freedom for different versions of what we call collectivism. We're here to tell you that collectivist experiments are never the solution to the problems that afflict the citizens of the world. Rather, they are the root cause.
This 23-minute speech from Milei was absolutely marvelous. He knew that everything that he was saying, Army, was in fact directed at them, but he said it without saying it.
Oh, Milei, he is my spirit animal. I love this dude. I love that he spoke truth to power. Look, I got to be honest, and this is where I may separate from some of my Republican friends. I am not anti-elitist. I don't like that we've become an anti-elitist nation and even an anti-elitist world. I don't like that. And in fact, we see it from both the hard right and the hard left using the same anti-elitist language. I don't like that. I think that the wealthy and the powerful, they are truly a driver of economic growth. We've seen that for centuries, right? I don't like to be crapping all over them, but they're doing it to themselves. When you look at the World Economic Forum, right, the whiff, as you say, as they truly do whiff on these things. They all come together in Davos, one of the most expensive places on planet Earth. They fly on their private jets as they continue to whine about global warming. But what they continue to do is use the language of the left because they are scared that the left will eat them. And they as long as they continue to use words like stakeholder over shareholder, that is to say, people who are peripherally involved in a company, maybe they use their products over the people who have skin in the game, people who've invested in the company, who own the company, as they continue to prioritize stakeholder over shareholder, as they continue to prioritize equity over equality. That is to say that the outcome is more important than the opportunity. As they continue to use that language, they are destroying themselves. They're taking themselves, and by extension us, down the road of ruination. So yeah, I'm not anti-elitist, but they are making it very hard for me not to criticize them because what they're doing is insane.
Absolutely. And this was 1 year at Davos where they got a bit of pushback from it, from people that they gave their platform to. It was absolutely splendid. Ami Horowitz, thank you so much for your time. I know it's late there where you are. Thanks for staying up for us.
Always a pleasure.
Still to come, Kmart, like many other big brands, is refusing to sell Australia Day products, but they're going a step further than everyone else. The panel and I will give you the details right after this. Welcome back. Now, last year, Kmart made the decision to stop selling Australia Day merchandise, a decision that seems to have become a trend among big brands in 2024. But not one to be outdone. Kmart are now announcing that they'll never bring back Australia Day products. Ever. Not even if the date would change from January 26. No celebration of our nation, says Kmart. Let's bring in my panel, New South Wales One Nation leader Tanya Mihalek and the IPA's Director of Law and Policy, John Story. John, this suggests Kmart is waging a war not just on Australia Day. I mean, they're saying even if you move it, just no day are we okay with selling merchandise that celebrates this nation.
Oh, it's so revealing, isn't it, Liz, that the activists aren't complaining about Australians celebrating Australia on the 26th of January. They're complaining about us celebrating Australia. And that's very clear. It doesn't matter what the day is, they will be opposed to it. And I think that's something that's worth bearing in mind, even by supporters of Australia Day. I know a lot of people, more than the IPA polling shows 63% of Australians support celebrating Australia on the 26th of January. But I think many of them do get tired of the annual debate about it and might be willing to get a bit of fatigue and say, oh, maybe we should just change the date. It won't make any difference. Whatever the date is, they will complain about it.
Well said, John. And this displays that loud and clear. It's not about the date, it's about the patriotism. Tanya, the managing director of Wesfarmers Kmart Group said that in the terms of customer pushback, there's been nothing. Now, I don't believe this for a second, do you?
I definitely don't believe it. And I find it very interesting that the managing director actually came out and said that he wanted to steer away from politics. And this wasn't a political decision, because we know it's all about politics, because it's certainly not about what the customer wants. And what we've just heard, of course, with IPA polling saying very clearly that overwhelmingly people want to celebrate Australia Day, and I'm sure they actually want to buy the merchandise as well. So we know Kmart is being political, and they're being political for a very good reason, just like Woolworths are. And other retailers, Aldi as well, because they know they've got an inquiry on foot shortly, an independent inquiry apparently, supposedly being headed up by Labor luminary Craig Emerson. And we know that will be all about all these retailers coming out now to showcase their social progressiveness, trying to keep the Labor apparatchik guys on side to show that they're
Get up their ESG points.
Correct, absolutely. That's what this is about. It's all political. It's not about suggesting that people won't buy the merchandise, because I actually think the merchandise is very popular.
Yeah, and Coles is proving that, aren't they? Now, New South Wales Premier Minns is leading the charge against hate-filled sermons given by so-called leaders of Sydney Islamic community, pledging to review the state's hate speech legislation. Now, I don't know how excited to get about this, because he's been saying this for a few months now, John. But just this week, the Australian newspaper revealed yet another sermon in Sydney in which an Islamic cleric proclaimed that he prayed to Allah that he would kill the Zionists, quote, one by one, end quote. John, you're our legal expert. The review is going to examine Section 93Z of the State Crimes Act, which currently outlaws the incitement of violence on the basis of race or religion. How on earth have the hate speech preachers who have already come to light, this guy must be at least number 5 in Sydney alone, how has what they've said to date not qualified to trigger the existing 93Z?
you hit it on the head, Liz. It's not a problem with the legislation, it's a problem with the application. We really do have a two-tiered justice system where if you promote an anti-COVID lockdown protest online, or if you misgender someone online, you can expect a call from the police. But heaven forbid they break up a protest calling for the genocide of Jews. If this review is to do anything, it should look at the application of these laws, that they're applied fairly, that there is no special privileged groups in Australia that can say whatever they want, whereas other people come down strongly on for mild expressions of unpopular views. I seriously doubt that's what the outcome of this review will say, but I don't see that the problem is primarily with the legislation. It's simply applying it fairly.
John, sorry, Liz, can I just add to that? Because it's actually a lot more than that. It's actually about the politics. Minns has a major problem, and that is that he's got a Labor caucus going rogue on him on this issue. He has a lot of problems within the Labor Party itself. We've got the Labor Party branch meetings, moving motions that are in total contrast to what Minns' position is. He's got Labor MPs signing letters, open letters, suggesting that there be an entirely different position, again, in contrast to what Minns is proposing. So the bigger problem for Minns is that rather than cracking the whip with his Labor caucus, he wants to wave around another inquiry. He's got the opportunity to go to legislation. In a couple of weeks, Parliament resumes. We can just move the legislation that's necessary to support the police to be able to actually lay charges. We already made amendments in November. This is yet another stalling action by Minns, in my opinion. He knows the bigger problem for him is his own Labor Party.
Couldn't agree more, Tanya. Still to come, the panel continues. A rally is being planned in support of the ABC fill-in presenter. More about that after this. Welcome back. A rally is being planned in support of the ABC fill-in presenter Antoinette Lattouf, who was fired 3 days into her 5-day casual role for her posts about the war in Gaza. Get this, she was reprimanded by the ABC, told not to do it again. She did it again. They gave her the boot, and now she claims she was discriminated against because of her Arab background. The ABC denies this, and now it's in the courts. Rather strange feeling for us to actually side with the ABC over something. But on Sunday, writer Clementine Ford, who has also posted about the war online, calling Zionist women enthusiastic supporters of a murderous regime, will be leading the rally at Melbourne's State Rally. Tanya, a representative from Free Palestine Melbourne has written that at a time when the Australian Israel lobby has successfully pressured the ABC to sack Antoinette Lattouf, it is important for women to understand that the struggle for Palestine is also a feminist and a free speech issue. Help me out here, because I'm struggling to see how it is a feminist issue when Clementine Ford is targeting Zionist women.
Well, this is just feigned outrage. That's what it is. And it's funny because the ABC, well, can I just say with the ABC, they've made it very clear that nobody has influenced them in making their decision, and you would have thought that any media outlet or indeed corporation has a right to hire and fire staff as they wish in accordance with their own contracts. So this will be a contractual matter that will be dealt with in the courts. But ultimately, it is feigned outrage. It's just unbelievable that this suddenly is a feminist issue, because it's not. And I would have thought there'd be far more important pressing issues for women in Australia, particularly in relation to housing crisis, homelessness, women being unemployed, doing it tough, domestic violence. There's a whole plethora of issues that women are facing and need support with. I wouldn't have thought this would be one of them, and the fact that this is galvanising that many people to come out and protest is just outrageous. Look, it'll be determined and decided in the courts who's right and wrong, but ultimately the idea that this is suddenly a major international issue and this is about freedom and Palestine and so forth is just absurd.
Well, speaking of galvanising people, nearly 200 ABC staff are in open revolt over this sacking, John. They're all taking up Lattouf's cause. This injustice that has been foisted upon her because of her Arab heritage, not because she blatantly disobeyed her employer. 80 of them in Ultimo this week, John, got together, demanded a meeting with the MD and threatened to walk out if their demands weren't met. I was thinking to myself, ABC staff, don't threaten us with a good time. By all means, walk out.
Yeah, well, it's miraculous that they've become proponents of free speech all of a sudden. I don't remember any employees of the ABC or the activists opposed to this sacking, objecting to the sacking of Peter Ridd for his views on climate change, or defending Andrew Bolt when he was dragged before a court for expressing his views.
Or Israel Folau.
But suddenly when one of their... or any number of people on the centre right who have been, deplatformed or sacked or cancelled because of their opinions, but suddenly when it's one of their own, they're far more. They've become free speech absolutists, apparently. But look, the ABC is becoming more dysfunctional by the day, and unfortunately, taxpayers are funding this circus.
Well, as they say, there is nothing like a vested interest masquerading as a moral certainty. The Prince of Wales has arrived at a London hospital to be with his wife today after Princess Kate was admitted for planned abdominal surgery. The UK's Telegraph says close aides are refusing to comment on whether the surgery, the details of which are confidential, unbelievably they can still keep things confidential these days, could be something that affects her in the long term. We simply still don't know. Tanya, Kate has not been seen in public since Christmas Day, and despite this surgery being planned, supposedly, they are telling us, she still released a statement apologising for missing her planned engagement. So that does suggest the surgery was perhaps more urgent than the palace is letting on, and we do know that she's now supposed to stay in hospital for around 2 weeks, so it doesn't sound like a small matter.
Well, look, can I just begin by saying we wish, of course, the Princess of Wales a speedy recovery, and indeed the King for his surgery as well. Look, it does remind each of us how human the royalty really is. The fact that they're managing their own healthcare conditions and are trying to do so in navigating in a manner where the media is so interested and the public is so interested to know what exactly is the issue. Ultimately, I think that the Princess of Wales is entitled to her privacy, and I think her family obviously want to, and indeed the royalty there, the King and the entire institution there would like to see her being able to treat herself and be treated in a way where she does have that privacy. So I don't think, hopefully it's nothing serious, but ultimately I think she'll be given the best of care there in London, I've no doubt.
Yes.
And I think stay tuned for suddenly Meghan or Harry suddenly getting sick and wanting to put that out in the media that they're not too well either. So
it'll be like
that's what will be next, you know. So.
It works so well for the others. We need one of us or both of us needs to have a surgery.
And they're going to tell Oprah.
Get us back in the headlines. John, the King is also due to go under the knife for a procedure to correct an enlarged prostate. This is not unusual. In fact, I was very surprised to learn that 80% of men in his age bracket, the King is now 75, will experience this. So quite the education for me. Rumours are, though, that his surgery announcement was brought forward to take the pressure off Kate, as his surgery hadn't happened yet.
Look, that's possible, but if it's the case, then it may have had the unintended benefit of one of the most prominent men on the planet getting a disease that's one of the biggest killers of men on the planet, giving it some much needed attention. it's very public. I mean, I'd personally hate it if the entire world knew what surgeries are being done on me. But in this case, if it encourages one bloke to get something checked out, as you said, it's been a bit of an education how common this actually is, and it saves one life. That's great, and I second Tanya's comments about remembering that they are human beings, and I wish them a speedy recovery, both of them.
Indeed, I think that's why the King may have gone public with the issue, as opposed to doing a bit of a Kate and just being like, well, I'm going under the knife for something, nobody needs to know what. It may be him tipping his hat to the gents in his age group, being like, I may serve as a life-saving reminder to someone out there. Now, major supermarkets will face a Queensland parliamentary inquiry into the gap between the cost of groceries and what farmers are being paid for their produce. Tanya, will this achieve anything? I mean, the amount of inquiries we have, and half the time you never even hear about them again.
Well, Labor does love inquiries, okay? They're a great stall.
They love a good inquiry.
Okay? And you'd have to think, look, can I just say, One Nation, Pauline and One Nation have been raising the issues of the plight that the farmers have faced, particularly in Queensland.
This is true.
For many years, and the growers as well, that have not had a voice. And so this inquiry is long overdue. I mean, the Labor Party had years and years to put this inquiry up, and now in its dying days before the next state election, it's suddenly offering up an inquiry. And interestingly, all the supermarkets are on board. We haven't seen the terms of reference, so we don't know if it's got any meat to it, this inquiry. And indeed, it'll be run probably mostly by Labor MPs that control the Parliament. So I'm not quite sure what the inquiry will end up achieving, but you can bet your bottom dollar it'll just be a nice distraction for the Premier in Queensland.
Indeed. John, what are your thoughts on this? I actually like the sound of this inquiry better than the federal inquiry, given that's just about, are the duopoly price gouging customers? It starts at what said duopoly is paying the farmer at the gate, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, I mean, our farmers are really getting done over by the lack of competition by the supermarkets. You can tell there's a lack of competition by the major supermarkets because they can, stick their nose up at, 63% of the Australian consumers on Australia Day. I think it'll be interesting to see. We know now that, really, the party of big business is the Labor Party, as long as they do their virtue signalling bidding, promoting all the popular causes, the voice and climate change and talking down to Australia Day. Labor love them. So we'll see if that virtue signalling gives these large supermarkets any political cover. I expect, like Tanya, that almost nothing will come out of this. Maybe a little slap on the wrist here or there. But I think our farmers do deserve a proper, thorough review of pricing in this area.
Hear, hear. Tanya Mihalek, John Story, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Still to come, conservative Catholic bishops are rising up against their woke Pope. That's right after this. Welcome back. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Argentina's president, Javier Milei, has been warning of the decline of the West at the World Economic Forum at the hands of social justice and collectivism. Of course, no one there was listening and he knew it, but gosh, it's encouraged the rest of us. Sky News contributor Dr. Rocco Loiacono joins me now. Rocco, you've been following the WEF in Davos this week. Do you think Milei will be invited back next year after his 23-minute speech, reducing the lot of them to a grease spot on the carpet?
Good evening, Liz. Look, I'm not sure whether he really cares whether he's invited back again. I mean, he dropped some truth bombs for the Davos Daleks, didn't he? And I think, like you said in the introduction, it was a message to the world at large, and he would have been knowing that the world was watching. And the message is, look, if we don't do something, we're going to wind up like Argentina. We're going to suffer the same fate as Argentina, which is a bit like the alcoholic who has to hit rock bottom before he realises that there's a problem and that there's only one solution. If anyone, I hope, was listening, it was people in the Liberal Party here in Australia.
Oh, if only. Milei is very global in his outlook. He's known for that. But what's your take in terms of the international arena? Do you think they're receptive to him? Obviously not in the WEF, but how is he seen, as a crackpot or as an absolute legend? Obviously, those of our ilk would say the latter, but what's been said in your world? How do people see this guy?
Look, from talking to my cousins in Argentina, look, their only concern, and I think Milei's only concern, is to ensure that he does the job for them to pull Argentina out of the mire that it is in and give it the prescription that it needs. Look, in terms of international politics, I mean, within days of him assuming the presidency, he told the Chinese to stick their Belt and Road Initiative, which is the biggest in all of the Americas, where they could fit it. So the focus is on getting the job done. A bit like Giorgia Meloni. I mean, remember when she was elected Prime Minister, there were the meltdowns from the left and she was a fascist and the sky was going to fall in. But look, she's been focused on the job. The ratings agencies have given her a big tick. The polls are better for her than they were when she was elected. And I think I think Javier Milei will do exactly the same thing.
Absolutely. And now we've got Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. We just seem to be collecting these incredible leaders who, quite frankly, don't care how they're perceived on the world stage, because that is the definition of a true leader. They're just getting the job done for their own country. Now, conservative bishops say they will boycott the Vatican's decision to allow the blessing of same-sex couples, with Pope Francis saying he feels lonely and isolated since he made the announcement. Rocco, maybe if the Pope read his Bible, he'd understand where these true bishops are coming from. Scripture is scathingly clear on this issue.
Yes, look, I mean, popes of living memory like John Paul II and Benedict XVI had a wonderful knowledge of the Scriptures, and Benedict XVI was a wonderful theologian, probably the greatest of all time. So Pope Francis isn't as learned as them, but what he lacks in learning he makes up for in scheming, which means he surrounds himself with his mates who are mired in sexual and financial scandal, like the now head of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, Fernandez, Theodore McCarrick and Archbishop Maradiaga. Let's not forget that he's abandoned 70 million Catholics in China by cozying up to the Communist Party. So instead of having, as John Paul II and Benedict XVI had, 90% of the church on his side, he's got 85 to 90% of the church against him because he's upset the Africans, the Asians, the South Americans and the Western bishops, the Western conservatives. So is it any wonder that he's feeling lonely and isolated?
Indeed. He has brought this upon himself fairly and squarely, but I'm starting to wonder if there's something in the water at the Vatican, since the Pope's new head of doctrine, Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, has just been controversially appointed. He wrote a sex book in the late 90s called Mystical Passion, Spirituality and Sensuality, which some commentators have called perverse. What is going on with this papacy? Isn't this guy like a captain's pit by the Pope?
Look, I can only go back to what the late Cardinal Pell said about this papacy, that it's catastrophic. And we've just seen that being borne out over the last 11 years. The Vatican at the moment, and the Pope in particular, doesn't seem to be focused on the Church's mission, which is go make disciples of all nations, baptising them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. When the Church tries to marry the spirit of the age, it will become a widow in the next.
Amen, brother. Couldn't agree more. Dr. Rocco Loiacono, thank you so much for your time this Friday night. And that's all we have time for tonight. Thanks so much for joining me. Up next, James Morrow with the first US report of 2024. You don't want to miss this one because it's the presidential election year. And with Trump on the ballot, no one's going to be bored. We know this week was all about Iowa. He won it by a country mile, setting a new record. And I think this is the wave that's taking him all the way to the White House. Here's James.